Hi everyone, I'm Katie Miranda, the host of the Palestine Solidarity Telesummit, and I'm here today with Sam Bahour. Sam is a Palestinian American businessman and entrepreneur based in Ramallah. Sam is the co founder and chairman of Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy and the board member and policy advisor for El Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. He's currently an independent director at the Arab Islamic Bank. Sam, last time I interviewed you, we spoke extensively about the Palestinian economy. And this, for me, aside from the direct action solidarity on the ground aspect of Palestine solidarity, Palestine solidarity is really the most interesting to me as a businesswoman myself because, as you know, of course, Palestinians face so many more like literal and figurative roadblocks in running a business than we here in the West do. And unfortunately, the Palestinian economy is sometimes an issue that activists ignore. So, in this talk, that's what I'm going to focus on with Sam, because that's his specialty. So, Sam, can you tell us more about how being in solidarity with the Palestinian economy serves the political movement as well?
Sure. First, thank you for having me. The issue of political economy is an important one. And we learn it as political economy, and when we get to the real world, we start looking at politics as if it's separate from economy. I try to bring that back together to what it is, which is one phenomena that is applied in every country, ours included. The political economy of Palestine is linked directly to the political crisis that we're facing in terms of living under military occupation. Many in the solidarity movement, and we highly appreciate all that they do, focus on the politics of the conflict, focus on a tool or two, such as the prominent one today is the boycott, divestment, sanction campaign. Or boycotts, divestment, and sanctions, excluding the campaign. Those are all tools to use. And we have to keep in mind that they are only tools, and there are many, many more. One of the tools that we use to resist this occupation is creating jobs inside the occupied territory. For the sheer fact not to become a millionaire, if I wanted that, I'd stay in the U.S., but for the fact of trying to keep Palestinian youth in the country.
Right.
Every action of the occupation is forcing Palestinians to either leave, that would be the ideal solution for many in the Israeli government today, or to turn violent. Our pushback against that is to have a job, to have livelihood, to be able to create a family, and then hopefully to be well off enough to be able to choose nonviolent resistance against the occupation, because we will resist the occupation. That's a given. It's a given for us because we're not going to make history and be the first people in world history to wake up one morning and say, hey, we like this occupation. That's not going to happen. We will resist it. And I think the lesson that we've learned over history is that we need to be very shrewd in how we resist it nonviolently. And we have to remember that there's 4.5 million people under occupation that wake up every morning. They have to go to work, they have to go to school, they have to secure their households, they have to love and get married and buy couches and buy cars and buy apartments. All of that requires resources for them to be able to do that and have, I don't even want to call it a seemingly normal life, because it's hard to have that under occupation.
Of course, yeah.
But to have the bare minimums to be able to sustain themselves. That's where economy kicks in, and that's what brought us to create Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy. The goal being multifold. One is to create jobs. How to do it? By linking Palestinian companies directly to U.S. companies, not having to go through our occupiers' economy to be able to do any kind of job creation, which is what a lot of the donor states like the U.S. would like to see. They want our economy to be as intricately linked to Israel as our politics are. So we're trying to disengage from the Israeli economy by creating those direct links. And I would add that there's one maybe a byproduct to all of this, which is in doing linkage between Palestinian companies and American companies, we're actually educating corporate America about what military occupation is all about. If I rattle off UN resolutions or international law to corporate America, they will not understand one bit of it.
Their eyes will glaze over.
Exactly. If I come to a hotel owner in the U.S. and ask them why they don't have a property in Bethlehem, which is kind of branded a long time now, we get kind of an odd look. Yeah, I mean, Bethlehem is known. Why aren't we there? And try to create a reality where they actually decide to invest in a hotel, as the example I'm giving, in Bethlehem. Then when they try to send their beds to Bethlehem and they're stopped at the Israeli ports, because Israel controls all ports into the occupied territory, they will understand what military occupation is with a vested interest. So in a way, we hope that these ventures actually do get to come to fruition and create jobs. In the meantime, there's a lot of education that goes on the corporate world in America, and to be very frank, there's a lot of education that goes on in the corporate community in Palestine too, to understand that the world is a very big world, and they don't have to continue to look at their future through the prism of doing business with Israel.
Yeah, and one of the problems of reaching out to the rest of the world for Palestinians is, at least in terms of e-commerce, is that they can't use PayPal, right?
Right, correct. We are actually engaged in a very significant campaign against PayPal, calling for them to provide their services to Palestinians. They do provide it in the occupied territory, but only to Israeli settlers, illegal Israeli settlers. And we thought PayPal would uphold their moral high ground like they did in the U.S. a few years back. We're still in that battle, unfortunately. But there are other alternatives as well. But we face other problems in e-commerce, for example, which is our mailing system.
Right.
Our postal system is under Israeli military occupation. Only 3 days ago, the Israelis released 10 tons of postal mail to the Palestinian Authority.
Oh my
Mail
God.
that they collected from 2010. It was released in 2018 in one bulk sum.
Oh my God.
So if you sent me a postcard in 2010 and I didn't respond, I'm sorry. I'll probably get the card this week and I'll respond. This is the kind of restrictions that Israel puts on our economy. We can't let those restrictions stop us. So where postal need is involved in a business, we try to avoid it. We try to do a lot of software, a lot of online activity. There's a lot of outsourcing outfits. But we also have some physical products that are able to be exported as well. In Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy, in our portfolio, we have everything from a chocolate factory in the north of the West Bank that does chocolate-covered dates, which are great, who are looking how to sell
that out.
in the U.S., and we also have agricultural companies that are trying to sell products, everything from herbs and others, to the U.S. market. So we have a whole skew of different kinds of industries, including stone and marble, including greeting cards. It's rather interesting when people start to see what kind of products are able to come out of this occupied economy. And the sheer fact that we are able to produce something humanizes Palestinians in the eyes of Americans. All of a sudden, it's not all about conflict. Now it's about chocolate-covered dates.
Yeah.
Do they meet certification or they don't? And they do, by the way. So we'll be having those in the U.S. hopefully very shortly.
Okay,
so this
great.
is all multifaceted in terms of humanizing Palestinians, creating jobs, and educating both corporate worlds about the other.
The chocolate-covered dates is something I might want to have for Palbox in the future. And on that note, I actually bought some products for Palbox, which is a subscription box I run of Palestinian products. I bought some products from an email that Sam sent me. So this is how connecting with people like Sam and his organization, Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy, can really connect people here on the ground in the U.S. with the Palestinian economy. So Sam, when we spoke earlier, You talked about some red lines that international solidarity activists need to consider in terms of their solidarity with Palestinians. Can you explain more about that?
Yes, there are red lines that not only the solidarity community must respect, but we believe that Palestinians must respect as well. One of the red lines, for example, is doing business with settlements. Any business activity that has an involvement of settlements is based on an illegal reality and thus will assume part of that illegality. So we call on everyone looking at the business environment in Palestine to beware that there is an aggressive approach from the Israeli side to get Palestinians to interact with settlements for business purposes. For us, that's a red line. Another red line would be that we actually respect the labor laws in the country, and we make sure that the companies that we're working with have the at least bare minimum application and compliance with the law. We're not talking about marketing black market products. We're not talking about child labor. We are interested to make sure that our products are globally compliant, if we can call it that. So those are a few of the red lines that we have to keep intact. And ultimately, we want to make sure that the producers who are actually selling are getting their fair share in the trade agreement. This is not about buying something cheap and then reselling it at a high profit outside of the country. We want our farmers to realize the profit that they're due, given they're doing the harder work on the ground. But they can't do it by themselves. They need distributors outside the country. And the more that we can sell outside of the country through export, whether it's software or physical products, the more Palestinian companies will be likely to hire more people. And that keeps more Palestinians employed, which directly affects the political reality of Israel trying to get people to leave the country.
Right, yeah. So does Palestine have its own set of labor laws, or are you under Israeli labor laws? How does that work?
No, Palestine has its own set of labor laws. And they're easily accessible, and those are the ones that we are applying. Any international agreements that the Palestinian side has signed on to are applied within our law as well. So it's a way as well to start, even under occupation, to get our companies attuned to a global market. We've had the boot of occupation on our neck for 50 years. It's still there. But we at least want to move our eyes towards a global market because we are convinced that we are headed to statehood. And the sooner that we can start preparing the grounds economically for our future state, the faster we'll be able to rehabilitate the day the occupation ends. And we surely see an occupation coming to an end. Otherwise, we would not be engaged in all of this activity.
Sam, what resistance tactics, either politically or economically, are actually working in Palestine and producing results and moving the struggle forward?
There are many, and I can state a few examples. The big example is a campaign that we had with the European Union to get them to actually call on Israel to label their products properly and accurately. Thus, for the first time ever, a couple years ago, the EU passed legislation which called on Israel to identify which products, Israeli products, not Palestinian products, are coming from Israel proper and which ones are coming from the occupied territory. Israel had a fit. It was the first time that they had to self-define where the green line was. And they actually fired their representative in the EU because they didn't see this coming. But these kinds of activities help to make Israel pay an economic price globally for doing business with settlements. So the more Israel has a cost in doing business when settlements are involved, the quicker hopefully they'll change their means and end the occupation. You mentioned another one, which is PayPal, for example. One of the campaigns was we mobilized heavily. After writing many very cordial letters trying to get their attention, PayPal wouldn't respond. When we mobilized on the ground, in front of the company, on Twitter, on social media, we got their attention, and not only that, but we got a meeting, and now there's a process taking place of trying to see what is the bottleneck. And we've had other examples as well. For example, the .ps top-level domain for Palestine. We have websites, like my personal website for my company is aim.ps. PS is a designation for Palestine. That took many years at the global level to get past Israeli aggression to say we are Palestine and we do have a top-level domain. Same applies to the country code. We have a country code today. It's 970, unlike the Israeli country code, which is 972. That took many years to get the international body which manages country codes to accept Palestine as a state. So in summary, I can say that Palestine, the state, is becoming more and more codified across the board. On the ground, we still have that boot of occupation on our neck, but we are preparing the soft kind of power that we have by registering Palestine wherever we can, including the United Nations, so we can be prepared to enact our state the day we're able to do so on the ground. We don't have the luxury of waiting before we start, because life goes on even under occupation. So if it has to go on, let it go on in terms of supporting a future Palestinian state, not creating more dependency on Israel.
You know, PayPal actually recently shut down the PayPal account for Palbox and for several chapters of the International Solidarity Movement. And so I'm kind of conflicted now. Like, I think people should start boycotting PayPal because they're not doing business with Palestine. They're not doing business with Palestinian organizations. So I don't know what the right road forward is for that. Have you heard of PayPal stopping doing business with other Palestinian organizations like in the US and Europe?
I haven't. I know they don't serve anything in Palestine per se, but there's other companies as well that are taking actions against Palestinian activists, including Facebook, which is closing accounts, and as has been reported, some of them at the direction of the Israeli government, which is very troubling that American companies are taking directives from foreign governments. I guess with Trump in office, nothing is so surprising these days. But today we just got notice from Booking.com, who registers Israeli properties in the settlements as being normal properties. And we think it's time that people understand that if they're going to get a Booking.com inside of a settlement, they should know that they are on an illegal settlement, which is a security risk par excellence. And when these companies whitewash the occupation and whitewash the settlements, they're serving no one except their bottom line. And that's not good enough in today's world.
So Sam, what resistance tactics have you seen that are working coming specifically from the international community? Because what you were talking about before, it sounded like it was coming from Palestine itself.
There's many, again. I mean, I think we have to be aware and understanding that the puzzle of resistance is huge. So I've seen everything from successful sister city relationships, which I have a soft spot for because I actually started one during the first Intifada, and they are good platforms that engage local government. We've also seen some lobbying on the Hill, which have brought delegations of congressmen, congresswomen, and their aides to Palestine to see the Palestinian reality. Those are very successful because once people see with their own eyes, we're noticing that things start changing. We've also had many, I cannot even start to count them, number of church organizations which are not only bringing delegations to come and eyewitness, but they're also activating themselves once they get back home. I mean, yesterday I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for a talk at the Unitarian Church, and when I walked in, I said, you know, politics in the U.S. still is done in church basements, and they didn't need PayPal. They passed the hat, and this is old-style kind of organizing, and that's what we need. We need to be able to get political, to get in the face of political America, and we see that happening more and more with the younger generation of Palestinians and the Solidarity Movement. And we have to get focused as well. We have to start learning the topics from the inside. For example, one that I would like to see happen is addressing the Israeli bonds issue. Most of our state governments are invested in Israeli bonds. And I think that's a prime target that every community can address their state, if not their local government, and make sure, and it requires a little bit of investigation, but to make sure that our tax dollars are not being invested in Israeli bonds as long as Israel continues to maintain this occupation. And that's something that every state can look at as a statewide approach. So I do think that the efforts are many, and they're also in culture and arts as well. I mean, I'm on a General Assembly of an organization called the Palestinian Circus School, which I just love to be there because of its name. And people get surprised that, yes, Palestine has a circus school, and they go out around the world performing. And I want to put Palestinian clowns in front of American children. It's part of us humanizing. So things that the American community in solidarity can do is invite the circus school, to invite our music organizations, to invite our dance groups. Culture and arts goes a long way, I hope, in convincing a Western audience that we are really no different than them. And that's part of what I see happening throughout the solidarity community in a very effective way. So I do see in the American solidarity community per se, both the hardcore political activism, but I also see the softer cultural arts, humanity kind of approach. And I think it's building like no other, especially in the Jewish community. The Jewish community in particular has come many, many strides forward in not supporting Israel blindly. And that's important because we're not asking anyone not to love Israel. You can love Israel to death if you want. But the most important thing is to hold Israel accountable when it violates international law. And 50 years of military occupation is a blatant violation, not to mention the siege of Gaza, house demolitions, children's arrest, et cetera, et cetera. So we're seeing the Jewish community come out in numbers and paying a price for it. I mean, Peter Beinart the other day was questioned while he was going into the Israeli airport. This is an observant Jewish leader in the U.S. Who happens to call for boycotting settlements. He was stopped and questioned. He actually wrote his story in the foreword if someone wants to read it. So we're seeing across the board, times are changing. My only fear is that they're not changing fast enough. The urgency that the reality on the ground calls for has to be met with a doubling up of our efforts in the solidarity community, especially as Trump and his administration prepare to launch their deal of the century, which is basically trying to wipe the Palestinian struggle from the face of the earth, which will not happen. But there will be damage done if we don't push back in a very structured and focused way. And that requires activity, first and foremost, in all 50 states.
Sam, you mentioned just briefly about not investing in Israel bonds. Like, how does that work? Is that cities or counties or states? Like, how would somebody start a campaign to have their government not invest in Israel bonds?
That's exactly where the research and focus comes in that I was speaking about. It could be at any level of government. Okay. I know from firsthand experience that many state governments actually have funds in Israeli bonds, some of them significant. But that would require research in every locality to see. And it doesn't take much to find out because all of what we're talking about is public information. I mean, where our tax dollars are invested is accessible to the public if the public makes an effort to go find out. So it would need a little bit of research. And that's one target of a campaign. The Boycott, Divestment, Sanction campaign has global targets like HP and others that they're focusing on. And there's also just going down to the local grocery store and finding out which Israeli products are there and making an issue that how can we be carrying products from a country which is maintaining a 50-year occupation. And it's not about good Israelis and bad Israelis. It's not about the good Israelis in Tel Aviv and the bad Israelis in the settlements. Each and every settlement would not be able to exist if it was not for the state of Israel, providing them electricity, water, security, transportation, subsidies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the state of Israel which is the participant in this conflict. Not any aspect of it, but the whole state. And if we can find where that state has presence in the United States, we should take issue with it. Again, for the sake of making them compliant with international law, nothing more.
So, Sam, what tactics are not working either in Palestine or in the international community, and what should people stop doing because it's clearly proven that this is not working?
Well, one is violence. I think anybody who thinks that we can uptake violence to address our issue, I think is misled. History has proven otherwise, that the nonviolent approach is much, much more effective with Israel. Actually, Israel only has one game book, and it is of violence. That's why, for example, in Gaza, when they started their demonstrations at the end of March, totally nonviolent, they were met with 120 Israeli snipers who plucked off people like fish in a bowl. So violence doesn't work. On the political side, coming out to the international community, I personally think that we should stop the debate about one state or two state. I think that's a red herring. It takes us off track. Israel's not interested in one state, two states, three states, or any states. They don't even see Palestinians exist, as we saw in their last legislation called the Nation State Bill.
Right.
So I think it's more important for us to accept what the Palestinian political agency has accepted, which happens to be two states, and that's what the international community has accepted, and then immediately turn our focus to rights. Our issue of rights is a here and now issue. The issue of the end game is something the parties have to agree to. And I would encourage the international community in solidarity not to try to second guess the Palestinian political agency. Not that I have a lot of faith in that agency. It needs to be corrected. It needs to be changed. It needs to be modified and upgraded. But that's what we have. And as a Palestinian, I can tell you we have a lot of work to do. And as a Palestinian American, I can tell you in America, we have a lot of work to do to deal with our political agency called the White House today as well. But
Yeah.
the agency is what it is. And we have to be able to respect the agency no matter how weak or off balance the leaders are. The more important thing for us now is to focus on rights and to get the international community to hold Israel accountable. The end game will come in due time, but we're not even close to an end game today.
I was actually just talking to Jeff Halper yesterday about the end game, and he's working on a campaign, the One Democratic State campaign, as an end game. Have you heard of that?
Of course, and I love Jeff Halper, and I fully understand their approach, and I respect their approach, but I think that we're entering into an academic discussion today, given the entire international community has signed on and recognized the state of Palestine in the occupied territory. I don't like to change games when I'm in the last inning, and I think we're in the last inning of realizing our state. Once we have a state, then the two communities, Israelis and Palestinians, hopefully will be smarter leaders in the future leading them, and they can decide how they want to move forward. But one state cannot be imposed, because what Israel has in mind for one state is not Ohio and Pennsylvania, it's one apartheid state. And no Palestinian living under occupation in the frying pan desires to jump into the fire of apartheid. So I focus on statehood as a way to get the boot of occupation off our neck. I don't close the doors for any ultimate end game, but that's going to have to be decided between the two parties and not necessarily a discussion in the international community.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. We are just
Thank you.
about out of time now. I appreciate you taking the time to do this interview, and hopefully we've educated some people more about the importance of supporting the Palestinian economy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.